Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second episode of our podcast with the Baltimore Presbytery. We are delighted and excited to have our guest today joining with us, the Reverend Kate Foster. I'm so honored that you're here with me and sharing this moment. Thank you, Kate, for your time. For those who haven't had the good fortune of meeting Kate just yet, Kate is the executive director of the Center here in Baltimore Presbytery. Kate is a graduate of Wesleyan University and Columbia Theological Seminary. Kate has served multiple churches in Memphis, Tennessee, and the Baltimore area prior to becoming the executive director with the center in 2001. And Kate has two daughters and two coworkers, a cat and a dog. Is that right?
That is right. I do want to just make a date correction. However, I became the director of the center in 2011, not 2001.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's I had the note here. I misread it.
It hasn't been that long.
Newbie. I'm still learning this, so I apologize.
No worries.
So welcome, Kate. Again, we're so glad to have you on as our guest. Thank you personally as a friend. I'm excited to have this conversation with you to allow more people to know you and the center and the wonderful work that it does here in our presbytery and beyond. And so I'm excited for that. Kate, I gave a little bit of an introduction, but I know that can never really fully encompass any of us. Is there anything you wanted to add to that? Tell us a little bit about yourself, you know, what your life is, you know, your daughter's cat name, dog name, any of that fun kind of stuff.
My cat has a very unfortunate name that we adopted her. She was a rescue and she came with the name and we just left it. So totally. It's not one I would have chosen, but it's her name. So my cat's name is Fifi.
Fifi. Oh, that's awesome.
And she was abandoned as a newborn kitten, and a friend of ours fostered her and bottle fed her. And so, you know, we've known her from very, very, very little, but my friend's sons gave her the name Fifi. So it stuck. And my dog's name is Sadie, and she's also a rescue. She's a beagle, I think spaniel mix. Yeah. So
that's awesome.
She's great. Yeah. My daughters
that's awesome. Well, great.
Are 16 and 19 years old.
Oh, wow.
So I have two teenagers, and that's, you know, a wild ride, but wonderful in its own way. So.
Absolutely. I bet. So what's it like dealing with older children during this pandemic? How has that been for you all dealing with life in general?
Yeah, well, I think it's been, truthfully, it has its own challenges, but It's been much easier than I think what parents with younger children have been dealing with and trying to juggle. You know, my 19-year-old's in college, and she's living in the town where her college is located, in an off-campus house. So, you know, she's not here a lot of the time. And then my younger daughter, you know, she's 16. So she's very independent about online school. And she's been able to be at school in person 2 days a week. So that's been good. I think the biggest challenge for teenagers is the social isolation, because developmentally they are just like need to be with their peers as much as they can, you know, and being trapped with your parents in an enclosed space is like some kind of torture. So that's been the biggest challenge, but they're both doing fine. They've been industrious about the time that they've had that they would have been spending with their friends in normal life, and have been doing lots of art and reading, and that's been great in its own right. So
that's wonderful.
Yeah. So it's actually, I think, been all in all easier than for many parents.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah. I always wonder when I talk to parents, you know, about, the pandemic, parenting during the pandemic. I've got two younger ones, and so they're not quite as independent as your teenage young adult daughters. And so, Melissa, my wife, and I have to constantly juggle and go back and forth. And so we just kind of try to gather more information, what are other parents doing and dealing. And so I always like to ask that question. Well, thank you for sharing.
Sure.
Kate, we were talking the other day, and you were telling me a little bit about your background. You have an interesting spiritual church background. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like growing up in the church for you? Where did you grow up, and what was that experience like?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I was baptized in the Episcopal Church as an infant, but really was raised in the Presbyterian Church, and that's all I remember and know. When I was 3, my family moved from New England to Chapel Hill, North Carolina. This was in the mid to late 70s. And my parents joined a new church development that had been founded in 1967 to be a racially integrated Presbyterian church. It's called the Church of Reconciliation. Wow. Yeah. Wow. So when we joined it, it was still relatively young, less than 10 years old. And we were worshiping in a middle school cafeteria, Phillips Middle School. So those are my earliest memories of church. And then later, a family donated some land that was in the family to the congregation. And much to the chagrin of the donors, the church turned around and donated like half the land for some public housing to be built, which the family had not intended for the land to be used for, and it worked out fine. But so that housing was actually built long before there was a sanctuary. So, so I was in this racially integrated congregation that was, obviously very countercultural in the South in the late 60s and 70s. We had no building for the first 10 years, probably, that my family belonged to it. So we worshiped in that middle school cafeteria. And then when the land was donated, we had Sunday school in the old farmhouse that still stood, very old farmhouse still stood on that land. Yeah, like the only thing I remember about that, because I was a little kid, was that the floors were slanted. That's awesome. And then we had worship in the basement of the bank that was next door.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so I was part of this. I literally did not realize this until I went to seminary in my late 20s. But I was formed in a community whose very identity and founding story was built around racial justice and inclusion. And so I was really gifted with this experience of church that, until I went to seminary, I thought was just what churches were like, right? That for me was as close to what I've seen of what God's kingdom on earth can look like, right? I mean, I've experienced other little examples of that, but for a church to be economically and racially diverse, especially in that time, and for me just to not know that was unusual was a beautiful way for me to learn what it means to be church.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Yeah. And so obviously that's helped shape some of your theology, your own personal theology. Mm-hmm. What are some of the ways that it's helped shape that? Your own personal theology?
I think it's commitment to diversity and inclusion early on, branched out into other forms of that. So it had a really strong influence on my ability to see myself as a clergy woman, because I was surrounded by a lot of clergy women growing up. So for whatever reason, we had, some 2 different interims that I can remember when I was growing up who were women. We had 2 other women who were in non-church ministries. One was a chaplain and one was running a faith-based nonprofit. And they were worshiping members of the community. And so again, as a kid, I had no idea that in the 70s and early 80s, that was, not a normal thing for a congregation to have so many clergy women. And so it was very easy for me when I, in high school, started discerning a call to ministry. It was very easy for me to picture myself as a pastor because I
had those examples.
So yeah.
Oh man, that's wonderful.
So, and then the longtime pastor, who was a man when I was a young child, had a degenerative neurological disease, and it was progressive. So in my early years at the church, he was, fully able-bodied, but he slowly lost function of his hands and feet, and then his arms and his legs. And so when we finally did a capital campaign and built a building, it was designed and built to be fully wheelchair accessible. And the whole chancel area was fully wheelchair accessible, the communion table, the pulpit, everything. And so again, I guess to get to the answer to your question, my experience or the formation of my theology has always included this radical inclusion, this radical acceptance of all people, and this vision that we're all God's children, no matter how we're created or what life throws us, right?
Yeah. Oh wow.
So that's a huge piece of it for me.
Do you think that being close to a college campus helped some of that sort of progressive being?
Yeah, I'm sure it did. I'm sure it did. Although we were the new church development was started by, as many new church developments are, by a group of people from the University Presbyterian Church that volunteered to sort of plant this new church. So we were not the Presbyterian Church adjacent to campus. There's another one that is. So we were the other one in town. Okay. Yeah.
And you talked about the diversity there across, gender, cultural identity, race, and so on. And I can imagine others. When you were saying that, I was thinking about, just because you have a diverse congregation doesn't mean that you're necessarily progressive.
That's true.
Right? Because just because you're one thing, or we aren't all monolithic, one singular kind of thing. So was that kind of a more unique experience? I mean, it was unique by itself, but even having that progressive sort of theology within the community, was that something that was unique, do you think?
It was not unique in my community because, again, being a university town, it's a pretty progressive small community in a very conservative state, but our immediate community, has always been very progressive. So I think that was another thing that I knew that my church was progressive, but I did not fully understand how progressive it was until I went to seminary.
So what happened when you confronted, ideas that were more conservative, or people or different communities? What happened to you in those experiences?
I think I became painfully aware of the shortcomings of what I had been exposed to.
Oh, really?
I think many of us, well, not everybody, but a lot of people who had a positive early church experience can be very attached to our experience of church, right?
Sure.
And so I definitely was that way. And then I started to get a different perspective when I was exposed to a wider world of churches when I was in seminary. And so I started to see, wow, I didn't really learn the Bible the way
that's
my more conservative classmates did, or classmates who came from a Baptist tradition into the Presbyterian church. Boy, did they know their Bible frontwards and backwards. There was almost a pride in my church of not being like a typical Presbyterian church and not being as engaged with the presbytery. And I started to see that, like, I had bought into that pride, and I don't really know where it came from because I was a kid, but I started to see, like, wait a minute, I believe in this connectional system. I don't know that I think that's something to be proud of. Right. And then I also realized that I don't know that it was overt, but there was a self-consciousness in my church because it was very theologically liberal. There was a self-consciousness about claiming Jesus.
Oh, really?
And the self-consciousness had to do with, I think, probably being in a conservative state in the South, not wanting to be seen as fundamentalist. And so wanting, when people identified themselves as Christian, wanting sort of the next half of that sentence to be, but I'm not that kind of Christian.
Oh, sure.
Right. And so I realized when I went to seminary that I had some issues to work out about what I believed about Jesus, because I hadn't been, I'm grateful I was not, I don't have trauma or painful early Christian experiences. And I know a lot of people who have had really painful experiences of church. That was not the case for me. But if I was going to be a pastor, I had to figure out this Jesus thing. Like that's pretty important.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Yeah, it's interesting. I think we sort of share similar backgrounds in that sense, church experiences. And I don't think I got to share this with you, but my home church, the church that I grew up with it was a Presbyterian church plant who met in an auditorium of a local school until we got a building and
wow.
There were similar nuances and so forth that, like you were saying, I didn't have the most we didn't have to recite scripture and memorize scripture and things like that. So I kind of relate to that. I hear it. So when I got to college and seminary, got around others and went to a conservative university, generally speaking, and so my friends were spouting out scripture like nothing, and I was like, oh man, did I miss something? Am I supposed to be doing? So I definitely hear you on that. And I know that for me, that shaped a lot of my theology as well, right? Clearly our backgrounds, our experiences has caused us, especially during seminary, to reflect and analyze and think, about where our theology lands, where we differ from our background, where we want to be and where we want to go, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. Do you think that your background is what kind of led you to the work that you're doing with the center in this current context?
I mean, I think all of our backgrounds do that, right? Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
So for those who don't know very much about the center, can you tell us what it is, how it started, how you got involved? Sure. What does it do?
Yeah.
All that kind of good stuff.
So in let's see, like 2009, 2010-ish, 2009, I think it was, Deb Milcarrick, who was a staff person of the Presbytery, and a couple other people, Bill Hathaway, I'm not sure who else was at the ground level of that, but had been kicking around the idea of starting some kind of mission center of the Presbytery. And Deb had a little bit of seed money for starting something, and she convened a group of maybe 10 or 15 people, mostly from Baltimore city churches, like lay leaders and pastors. And Bill Hathaway was pastor of First Presbyterian of Annapolis. And he was a part of that group as well. And we met monthly for a good 12 to 18 months to discern whether or not God was calling us to start something like this, and if so, what it might look like. And we shared a lot about our own experiences with mission trips. I think the original idea was, could we have a program that would host church groups for mission trips in Baltimore? That was like the original idea.
So, I see.
Yeah, so we started sharing our own experiences, and we also started sharing stories about our churches getting regular phone calls from churches from all over the country who were coming to Baltimore for a mission trip and wanting to know if they could sleep on our, the Sunday school room floors. And do you have any ideas for what we could be doing for our mission work, right? Our mission work. So we established pretty quickly that we felt like there was a steady stream of demand for both overnight space, but also we realized there's no mechanism in place for helping these church groups have a meaningful mission experience, right? Because we all would give them the names of a couple larger, better known nonprofit organizations and would suggest that they contact them. But, there was no thought beyond that. And there's no mechanism for helping them plan something that would be meaningful. So once we all started sharing our own experiences with mission trips, many of us had gone on a mission trip. Most of us had gone on a mission trip where we were building something for someone in another country, usually a developing country. Yeah. And, we all had, actually, I think everybody had experience with that. And none of us are contractors or had any construction experience prior to these trips, right? And in many cases, we were teenagers or college students. And, the more we started sharing them, and it was like a similar story over and over again, it was funny, but it also, we realized, was very problematic on a lot of levels, right? So, and we all, many of us had come home from those trips and felt gross about it. What was the point of that trip? There's this meta narrative that we have in the church about mission trips are to go and help people.
Right.
Well, whoa, let's back up a minute. Where's that coming from? Yeah. And does anybody in any other part of the world have that narrative, or is this a uniquely North America, United States?
Yeah.
It's a unique narrative to the American church, the North American church. It's arrogant, and it is built around our need to feel good about ourselves.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's built around a theology of mission that sees need as being about material wealth, and where we define the need, right?
Wow. Yeah.
There's so many things I could say about that. So anyway, we got deep into that conversation and realized that we were not interested in recreating that colonialist approach to mission, that we wanted to sort of rebuild and redefine what a mission experience could look like and subvert the colonialist missional approach, and create a more partnership-based model. And in the middle of those conversations, our general presbyter at the time, Peter Nord, attended one of our meetings. And he was up to his eyeballs in a presbytery-wide conversation about restructuring the presbytery, revisioning what it means to be a presbytery. And so at the time, the presbytery was working towards a new vision that would move away from being a program-led, top-down presbytery to being structured and built around meeting the local church where it is and helping that church thrive and be the best church it can be in its particular context. And so sort of being steeped in that conversation and that process, Peter Nord suggested at this meeting, well, what if when these groups come in for mission experiences with you, you partner them with one of our local churches. And maybe in that way, the center could be like a backdoor impetus for helping our churches get more engaged in their local communities.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And we thought that was a really, really brilliant idea.
Absolutely.
For a lot of different reasons. And so we decided to go with that model. And let's see, this would have been like late 2010 or maybe very early 2011.
I see.
Sometime around then. And we actually stopped meeting for a while because the presbytery was like actually voting on the new structure and everything. And there was just a lot of emphasis being put on that process. And so we stopped meeting. And then somewhere in the winter, spring of 2011, Deb and the group decided that they were ready to hire a staff person to get this up and running. And I had been doing youth ministry and was kind of feeling called away from that, and increasingly started discerning a call into being the staff person that would take this vision and make it happen. So I ended up being hired like it was like 5 to 10 hours a week, very part-time, to take this vision and make it a reality. And so in May of 2011, I came on board very part-time to get this thing started.
Well, what an incredible, fascinating journey for the center from the, the idea to kind of the process, unfolding, as it were. There are two things that kind of struck me, and I don't know how long this episode might go, but we might have to have you on for a later follow-up episode sometime to talk.
Is that a nice way of saying I'm talking too much?
No. I'm saying that's my way of saying this is fascinating. I want to talk more, but I want to respect your time and listeners' time. So maybe if we can work this out, we can meet again. But there are two things that I think are that you mentioned that are really interesting. One is this traditional model of mission that we had, and you mentioned, colonialist, patriarchal, even, and as someone who represents a different culture, we might even say, predominantly white Anglo narrative for totally. Mission work.
Yeah.
So that's the first element of it. What do you say when groups come? Do you still do work around that? Do you have those conversations with the groups that come in? What does that look like? Because I know a lot of our churches now are having a hard time with that conversation and that dialogue. Yeah. What do you say to those churches? What do you do with that?
Yeah, so we joke often on the center staff that 80% of our time is unwinding that theology. And it is so deep. It is so deep in the North American white church. It's so deep that we can teach about it, talk about it, name it all week when we have a group for a week, and still on Friday, somebody's going to talk about what a meaningful week they had helping people, and it's like, it's just really, really deep in us. So a year or two, probably 2 years ago, we made a decision on staff because we had been, it's a delicate thing, right? Really churches are rightly very proud of and feel really good about the missional engagement that their churches are engaged in. Right. And so to bring any kind of form of critique to that is delicate, right? So who am I, who have known you for Absolutely. 1 minute, to suggest that maybe the way your church has been doing that is not great, right? So that's a delicate thing when you don't have a trusting relationship with a person or with a group. We decided a couple of years ago, because we had been dancing around this delicate conversation, that on night one, when groups first come in, we were just going to say in the orientation, So we just want to let you know that, and we hope you're not disappointed, that at the center, nobody is here to help people. Like that is not why you're here this week.
Yeah.
And we just
how do they respond to that?
We just want to get that out of the way on night one. Yeah. Hopefully you will be helpful, but your purpose this week is not to help people. Like that is not the focus of why you're here. Right. Some people get angry.
Yeah. Oh.
I mean, it's okay though. It's actually okay
because
when we say it right off the bat, we often get pushback. And I don't mean like shouting match angry, but like it's activating for some people because it really confronts something that's very deeply held in the North American white church sense of what it means to be a person of faith and a follower of Jesus. Right. And I think partly it's because there's no other theological scaffolding. There's nothing to take its place. So, oh my gosh, like that's why I've always gone on mission trips. Like this is a tradition in our youth program, or this is a tradition in our church. We do these every year. And we've gone to all these various places and we've done all these good things. What do you mean we're not here to help people? Yeah. But I think the shock of it actually, like in the end, creates more of an opening to have a conversation about, well, gosh, okay, you just totally like exploded my idea of what a mission trip is or what mission is in general. So, can we how are we going to rebuild that?
Yeah. Where do we go from there? Right.
Yeah.
So that leads to the other question. And that is, with this sort of new broken down sense of mission or outreach or serving, with and the rebuild of that sense, what do people do? How do they connect that to their community? Right, they're more local community, should I say?
You mean like when they go back home?
Yeah. What's that conversation? Because that was the other part. You said, the center works on connecting churches with their local community. Looking at the needs and so forth, and just overall what their community looks like. How does that work that you do and that breaking down apply to when they get home, their communities? How does that work?
Yeah, so our theology of mission is very, very much built around the centrality of relationship. And so that's really the core of everything that we teach and everything that we practice at the center, and everything that we understand about what it means to join God's mission in the world is that you can't join God in God's mission if you're not doing it in relationship with other people. That's right. Like it's not, otherwise it just becomes transactional and you slide into that helping people thing. And the helping people thing is about power. It's about, I have something that you don't have, and you poor unfortunate person, I'm so big hearted that I'm gonna like reach way down to you and give you food or a coat and a hat and mittens. And that's really important. Like people need food and people need warm clothes. And so I'm not meaning to say that's not helpful, but it's time for the white North American church to like look at and name and deal with the theology and the politics and the self-image that is underneath that. So that's not what you asked about, but at any rate.
It's helpful. No, but it's part of the conversation.
Yeah, it's all intertwined, right?
Right, exactly.
So the core of our missional theology is about relationship. And so that's what we teach in this curriculum. We have a whole curriculum that we teach in the evenings around the hands-on part that groups are doing. And we move from the beginning of the week, we focus pretty exclusively on learning about Baltimore. We take our groups on we call it a justice tour, where they get to see different neighborhoods, they get to see wealth, and they get to see poverty, they get to see investment by the public and private sector in the wealthier neighborhoods, and they get to see disinvestment decades of disinvestment in poorer neighborhoods. And, and we talk about things like good neighborhood, bad neighborhood, right? Those are loaded words. So what does it mean when you say, oh, this is such a good neighborhood? What does that actually mean? Usually it means white, wealthy, blah, blah, blah.
So on and so forth.
Yep. So we start out with that. We learn, it's not an accident that those neighborhoods are like that. It's not an accident that some neighborhoods get more investment and some get less. And so we start sort of looking at this, and then they go and serve in the neighborhood that they're serving in. And there's kind of a running conversation while we're serving, because there are inevitably questions or things that come up just that happen. And so we'll do sort of connect what's happening in real time to the things we're learning about the city of Baltimore. So we start out there, and then by the end of the time with us that we have a group, we make a slow shift to asking them to take a look at their own community. And we started a couple of years ago, the last night that we have a group with us, we started printing out demographic maps, a few of them. And we will pass them out and ask the group to look at them. Because what we noticed was it's very easy when you're in someone else's community or someone else's city. Like, this is what we would hear about Baltimore all the time. Oh my gosh, Baltimore is so segregated. You have such a racist history and the racist policies of this city. Like, I can't believe what people did in the early 20th century that led to this hyper segregation we have now. Like, wow, and it's like this finger pointing thing. And what we want, we say it, but we want to show people visually, like, this is the same story. Like, pick any county, town, village, city in the whole of the United States, pick anything. Right. It's the same story again and again and again. It's not unique to Baltimore.
That's right.
So we print out some demographic maps. We print out, percentage of white people in your city on a map, and it's shaded by color, percentage of Black people, income levels, we'll choose 3 or 4 different maps, and we have them look at it, and we have them identify where their church is located on that map and where they live on that map, and start to ask them to make those connections. Like, what is that about? And sometimes the groups are from the wealthier neighborhoods, and sometimes they're from the poorer neighborhoods. And either way, it's really shocking to them to see this map, and to realize, to see the hyper economic and racial and cultural and ethnic segregation that exists in their own backyard.
It's incredible. And I think that's an eye opener for many folks, right? Not just the groups that you work with or the center works with, but for all of us to recognize the history that's been set before us. As you're right. I come from a different part of the country, right? I'm from Texas, grew up in the Dallas area. That stuff happens in Dallas and in Fort Worth and, all over Texas. So, anywhere we go.
So the conversation we are sort of pushing them towards and start to have towards the end of their time with us is, okay, so you've been deep in this in Baltimore. Hopefully you can see that this is the reality in your own community. I mean, it's going to have its own contextual uniqueness. So how is God calling you personally and your church to cross those lines that divide people in your own community, to take part in the beloved community that God is knitting together, whether you're part of it or not, but if mission is about relationship, you can't engage in mission without being in relationship with all of God's children. So how are you going to do that in your own community? So we start that conversation. We follow up with our groups, a couple months out. And then the rest is up to them, if they have the energy, the leadership, the ability, whatever, to take that and run with it at home. And some groups do and some groups don't. Just depends on.
And so some groups do and some groups don't. The center doesn't have an extremely long history. It's still relatively new, at least in its current state. What have been some of the highs with that? What have been some of the successes that you've heard groups come back to you and share with you?
I would say we've heard some success stories from groups and more stories about individuals who have been transformed.
I see.
But also, we don't always hear.
Oh, no, of course.
Right. So there's probably a lot that I just haven't heard about. So we had a group that came through who went home and started a fellowship program with the public housing community that was near their church. They would go share a meal once a month after their trip to Baltimore. And then the same youth group came back for a second summer, and they returned home after their second summer, after they've been doing this fellowship program all year. They learned that the children in this public housing community really needed more academic support than they were getting at home or in the schools. And so the youth from this youth group returned after their mission experience with us, and the youth wrote grants and got funded and started a weekly tutoring program after school.
Wow.
That's like one of my favorite stories. And that's still running. So that was really cool. We've heard about individual young people changing their college majors, from business to sociology. There was a young woman who served with one of our partner churches that's very involved in its neighborhood elementary school. And she was so angry after spending a week in that school about the space, that like inadequate space that the kids had to learn in, that she decided to major in architecture in college so that she could design spaces that would foster better learning for children, better opportunities for learning. What else? I just heard another story recently and I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was somebody who, again, it was a college major who decided to pursue political science to be able to affect change in the world. So we hear more individual stories like that.
Sure. Well, but that's a really important, even within those organizations that they represent, we need people to have their own voices and perspectives brought and have their voices heard within the context of a community, so that more people become aware of those things, whatever they've seen and want to see changed. So that's incredible. Wonderful successes and transformations in that sense. The flip side to that are always the tough times. Obviously, right now during a pandemic, that's been tough. What has the center done? How has the pandemic affected the work that the center has been doing, continues to do, and what adjustments has the center made?
Yeah, it's been a very, as it has for all of us, a very challenging time.
Absolutely.
There's this whole other side of the center's ministry that I haven't even talked about yet. So maybe we are due for another long conversation.
Yeah. Oh, all right.
That whole other side, let me just say briefly, developed when we were trying to roll out this model of partnering these groups with local churches, and there was only one church that was engaged in its neighborhood in a hands-on relational kind of way, that was ready to host a church group, to serve with them. And so we kind of panicked and wondered if this model was going to work, and decided to run a pilot with that one church to see if it would work. And it was wonderful, and it did. But at the same time, we started developing a consulting and teaching side where we could do some capacity building around local mission with our local churches. So churches that wanted to be more engaged locally, understood the importance of relational ministry, but weren't sure how to connect with their neighbors and needed some support and some training and some encouragement and some challenge to go do that. And so, so because we've developed that side and some curriculum around that, when COVID hit and we had to cancel our in-person mission weeks and mission weekends, we had some other things that we had developed that we could do. So we've been largely teaching, I've been able to get out and support our partners, just physically hands-on by volunteering my time. We have been holding monthly community engagement conversations for churches in the Baltimore Presbytery who want to join a space with other leaders in the church who are engaged in local mission to bring up something they're thinking about or a challenge they've run into or somewhere that they're stuck and they want to just put it to the group and workshop it. So we've been doing that. We developed a training for youth and young adults in community organizing. We watched youth lead the Black Lives Matter protests and organize the Sunrise Movement over the summer, and thought it would be really cool to see the church sort of building up those leaders and giving them some more tools to continue to develop those movements. And so we had a fabulous group of young people from all over the country, as far away as Washington State and Kansas and Florida, who showed up every week for 6 weeks and jumped right in enthusiastically, and they are wonderful. So we did that. Awesome. We've been developing some anti-racism training around community engagement. So a lot of things like that. And just trying to support, be in touch with our partners. Absolutely. Just support them through conversation, rounding up volunteers for them, and donations if we can. So That's kind of what we've been focusing on during COVID.
Well, I think you made a great point, just acknowledging that there are people. This isn't just Baltimore Presbytery community in the bigger sense. The center connects with people from across the country, from across denominations, and organizations, some even non-religious, right? So, the work that the center does is truly community, as in diverse, representing all kinds of people. And that's such a great joy to hear that this work is going on. And then the fact that you're able to and have been able to adjust and adjust on the fly during this pandemic, where many churches are struggling to even figure out what to do, how to continue. The center has kind of shifted to do some more work and work that falls in within the strengths that the center has. So what a great story. We're so glad as representatives of the Presbytery, we're so glad that the center is doing this great work and continues that. And then thank you to you for that, for your leadership in that. And I know that you've, the work that you've done and the center has done. McKenna Llewellyn is also on staff as well. The work that she's done has been incredible. We just, I'm so glad that you are able to share the story with us. And so Kate, so for this last, I think maybe, we've had a good amount of time chatting, and maybe we'll come back and continue the conversation. But for those who want, more information, where can they go to find more information about the center? Yeah. Are there ways that they can participate as well?
Yeah.
Where should they go?
Yeah. So our website is the best place to go. We try to keep it updated. Sometimes we do a better job than others, but
certainly.
So that web address is thecenterbaltimore.org. Pretty easy to find. You can also Google us and you should find it easily. There's a lot on there. There's a great video about sort of the hosting group side of what we do. So that's the best way. You can always reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to folks. Really, at the end of the day, we are here because we want primarily our churches in Baltimore Presbytery to have the support and the resources to be able to engage with their local communities in whatever way makes sense for their neighborhood and for their church. And so we want to be supportive however we can in those endeavors. And then secondarily, we are passionate about that for the whole church. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I was going to ask you, is there anything else you wanted to share with us? But you wrapped it up so beautifully, articulately describing, the connectivity, the work that the center does in connecting churches with their greater community. I feel like there's no need to ask that question, but I'll just throw it out there anyway. Is there anything else you want to add to this that maybe you haven't been able to touch on just yet?
I guess the last thing maybe I would say is that starting in March, we're going to be offering hands-on sort of day-long outdoors, socially distant opportunities for members of Baltimore Presbytery churches to serve with some of our farm and food partners. Awesome. And then they're going to be free and just open to individuals. Normally, we just plan these for groups. But if any individual person is feeling called to serve and isn't sure how to plug in, we're going to offer pop-up mission Saturdays starting in March. Yeah, so that'll be posted on our website soon. And then we're going to be running in-person mission weeks, again, outdoor, not overnight, for churches within driving distance, largely with our food and farm partners. But if anybody's interested and has people of any age who are, want to engage in some kind of mission experience, we're going to be able to crank it back up in a limited way very soon. So,
that's awesome.
Stay tuned. Yeah.
Wow. Well, Kate, thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
Thank you so much for sharing with us what the center is about, and certainly what your life and experience has been. And it was such a joy to visit with you. I'm thoroughly honored and thankful to have visited with you, to have our conversation. And I hope that maybe we can reconnect someday in the near future, and we can keep the conversation going.
I hope so too. It's a privilege to be invited. So thank you, Jose.
My pleasure. Well, thank you again, Kate.
Sure.
We really appreciate it, and we look forward to the great things that the center has done, is going to do, continues to do, and your work and leadership in that. So thank you again, and we'll talk to you later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Take care.
All right. Thank you.